Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wristwatch Revival. My name is Marshall. Thank you so much for coming along. This time on the bench, we have this beautiful vintage record watch company watch from probably the late 1940s. At least that's what the research suggests from the owner of the watch. And the owner of the watch is really interesting. His name is Maximilian, and he sent me an email talking about how enthusiastic and excited he was about watchmaking and watches and how much he enjoyed watching the channel. And I thought that was really cool. It turns out he's 15 years old. He's from Denmark, and he's very, very into this stuff. The way that he got into it was actually interesting, and it's also the way that he got this watch is he would go to flea markets with his grandpa. He said his grandpa has been going to flea markets for a long time, but you know, after you find out that they might have some watches there, you might just pop down there with grandpa. And he says that they've made it a bit of a tradition to go. And one day they had gone to a shop and there was a watch that he may want to go back and look at. So he convinced his grandpa to go down. They couldn't find parking, so he just hopped out and ran inside. And sure enough, he found this in the pile of watches. It hadn't been there the day before, and he was really, really excited. Let's take a look at how it's running on the time grapher before we finish the story here. He said it was not running well. In fact, he said it was running very, very quick. And yeah, that is exactly right. Maximilian had it exactly. We've got a snowstorm, plus it's over 900 seconds a day fast, so that's not going to work at all. And in fact, taking a quick look here, this is another way that you can do timing, basic timing on a watch, is you can set it next to a known good source. So at 1 minute, which is right there, this watch was running at 42 seconds per minute. So hugely fast. And there's definitely something going on that we're going to need to take a look at there. So that's what we're going to do this time for this project. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time. And let's take a look at the movement. Oh my, look at that movement. Wow, that has some really nice finishing on it, and it's beautiful. I can't lie, I'm a little surprised at the quality of this movement in this watch. Maximilian said that his grandfather bought him this watch, and it cost about $3.50, as in $3.50 for the thing. So I think they got a really great flea market find with this watch, assuming that we can get it running correctly, because I'm impressed. This is a legit awesome looking movement in here. And the watch has all the cool vibes and everything going for it as well. So let's take a look at it and see if we can't get it going. What we'll do is we'll completely take the watch apart and we'll service it. And while we do that, we'll also look for any potential issues that may be going on with the watch. And then, you know, when I get a watch in like this, I'll contact the owner and we'll talk about some of the different choices that they may have as far as aesthetics go. Do you want to have the case polished up so it's looking brand new or not? Now, one thing that I do want to test here, though, is this is an old... Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Yeah. Okay, well, it looks like my assumption was true. This is an old dial from the late 40s. This is before tritium lume, which is very, very minorly radioactive. This is radium. Now, I noticed that the hands don't have any lume on them, and they have like none. And that usually means that somebody took the lume out. And the reason to do that would be because it's deteriorated too much to be functional, and also people will often take radium lume out because it is dangerous. It is a toxic substance, and so you have to be careful with it. In this case, it's actually the lume plots. That's the little dabs of lume that they put around the edges of the dial so that there's one next to every hour marker. Even that tiny amount is what was triggering the Geiger counter there. You can see those dark dots around the edge. And yeah, so even that can put off enough radiation. Now, these are considered generally safe for day-to-day wear, as the type of radiation that it emits can have a hard time getting through even just the plastic crystal that's on top. And let's just do a quick test. Yeah, so as you can see, it just spikes up when the dial's there, but nothing from the movement. It is just from that luminous material on there. I'm not surprised. You know, the watches pre, say, mid-1950s, if they have a glow-in-the-dark or luminous element to them, they're usually radium. And you do have to be careful with that. Okay, what we're going to do first here is we're going to let down the mainspring. And what that means is we're going to let the power out of the watch. You don't want a bunch of tension built up in the watch when you start to disassemble it, just because, something can go flying off or something could break if it very suddenly loses that tension. So it's best practice to just take the power out and then start the disassembly process. And that's what we're going to do here. As you can see, I'm going to start by taking off the balance and we'll set it aside. And that's just a precautionary measure. Yeah, I love seeing stories like this, the one from Maximilian. He sent me a bunch of emails. He's super excited about this. And what he actually did was interesting. He really wanted to see his watch get serviced. And so him and his grandpa took this watch to a number of watchmakers in the area where they live in Denmark. And the watchmakers, they would work on the watch, but he wanted to ask if he could watch, like if he could, look over their shoulder and watch him do it. And they all said no. And that's a little disappointing, but I get it. Like they're working and they have to do a bunch of work and maybe they just didn't, couldn't work under the distraction or whatever. But, when you have somebody so excited about something like that and a young person, I think it's pretty cool to be able to show them. And, he thought, well, maybe Marshall will do it and then he could watch every step. And that's exactly what's going to happen here. So I think that's pretty cool that he gets to see exactly what's inside of this watch and what was going on with it. And I think I'll take a little bit of extra time to explain some of the more common things that we see on these watches as well, like, the mainspring and how it all goes together too, just as a little learning experience, taking apart and putting back together a watch like this. By the way, if you're interested in taking apart and putting back together a watch like this, you're going to need some tools. And that can be the really big hard part to get into this hobby. And so what I did is I actually started a website where I curated toolkits for people who want to try this as a hobby. Specifically, it's called sutcliffehansen.com. There's a link down below. And that is, you can find kits for, beginner, intermediate, advanced, and it can be your first steps into the world of watch repair and watch restoration, because it can be very intimidating when you don't know anything about what tools to get. So I went through and picked out the ones that I felt were the best. Compromise in some case. Sometimes it's just the best of the best because you need the best stuff and it's worth it. And, sometimes for some of the more simple tools, you can get something that's a little more affordable. And I tried to find the best combination of that. I'm actually going to send one of our, we have it's called the Watchmaking Starter Box, and it comes with just the bare bones tools that you need to take apart and put back together a movement. And it also comes with a movement that you get to do that with. And I'm going to send one of those to Maximilian as well, just as a gift. They make a good gift. They're kind of made for that, for if you know somebody in your life who wants that. And hopefully Maximilian will enjoy it and maybe even give me some updates. This is the type of, for me, it's a hobby, but, for many people, it's a profession that, it's at risk. This is the type of thing that can go away, right? If people don't teach the next generation how to properly work on, restore, service movements like this, that is the type of thing that can kind of disappear to time. And I don't want that to happen. I think horology in general, watch repair, restoration, watchmaking is a super fascinating subject. It's the reason I started this channel, is because I started going down that road myself. And I wanted to show you what I found fascinating, because I figured I can't be the only one who thinks this is cool, right? And as it turns out, there's a lot of people who think this is cool. Even people who don't own watches or don't really care about watches, kind of want to see what's going on in these little mechanical wonders that we wear on our wrist every day. As you can see, I've got this one almost all the way disassembled, and it's coming apart beautifully. It actually is in excellent shape. This movement is in such good condition that it makes me wonder if perhaps this watch had been sitting for a very long time. Watches that lead a long life of services and being opened and maybe something goes wrong with them, you can tell even on the inside. And this one is just gorgeous. It's nicely finished across the board too. It has all of the kind of traditional finishing types that you see right here. These overlapping circles is called perlage. And on the other side, you saw those stripes on the bridges, and those are called Geneva stripes. This watch was actually made in Geneva as well. although Geneva stripes are used in watches from many different places. Okay, we can take apart the keyless works here as we finish up the disassembly for the most part. Watch is running so fast. Let's take a look at the mainspring. When it comes to the working on the mainspring on a watch, you've got different options. Oh, there's a little bit of grease in there, but nothing too bad. That's pretty typical. Oh no. Oh, God. I was trying to take the barrel arbor out and the spring flung it away. Okay, it looks like it just bounced onto the desk here, so not a huge deal. Got to be careful with that. Whoa. What I was going to say, though, is you can either reuse the spring or you can get a new mainspring, and it's always kind of a decision that you have to make. I'll take out the crystal here. Ooh, that's tough. That's actually, usually crystals come out quite easily. What is going, oh, I see. Yeah, so this is an armored crystal. Do you see that metal tension ring on the inside? That actually pushes out against the edge of the crystal and means that the crystal needs to be press fit into place, and it makes it a little bit more waterproof by doing so. And it's also why it was difficult to remove. But yeah, with the mainspring, you can replace it, or you can reuse the same one that you've got. And if you reuse the same one that you've got to find a way to get it back into the mainspring barrel safely. A lot of times people, if you can find a new mainspring that fits, they just go with that because you don't need the mainspring winders that way. And it's also not a bad idea to replace the mainspring most of the time. So if you're just starting out, it's totally okay to just replace the mainspring every time. Oh, look at that. So this has one of those gaskets that's like a clear plastic rather than what we use now, which is like a black rubber, you know, an O-ring. Now this looks like one of those kind of flatter clear gaskets. It actually held up reasonably well, but we will need to replace it to make sure that the waterproof capabilities of this watch is at least as high as we can get it. I would like it, you know, to get to the point where Maximilian can wear this watch every day. And part of that, of course, is going to be cleaning things. So what we're going to do now is take every single part and put it into these little mesh baskets where it can be put into the watch cleaning machine. This is an absolutely vital part of servicing a watch. This removes not just dirt and debris, but also any leftover lubricant or oil that was on the watch that had since dried up. And it's really important to do so. And the way that I do it is I use this watch cleaning machine that has 3 different stages. This first one is the actual cleaning solution. It's like a solvent. And the next 2 aren't. They're just rinses, but I mean, they're pretty powerful rinses as well. And by the time the watch goes through this thing, all 3 stages, it usually comes out pretty darn clean. With that, we'll let it go through its cleaning cycles. And while that's happening, I did want to say thank you to everybody who supports me on Patreon. It's basically the place where you can support your favorite content creators. So people that make videos here on YouTube, or songs or podcasts or artwork or anything like that. And you can support the people directly. And it can really provide like a useful foundation for content creators, because that way, you know, you're getting it directly from the people who are watching. It also gives you a direct line to the people that you are watching for messages or for posts and things like that. So anyway, I just wanted to say thank you very much to everybody who supports me on Patreon. And if you do decide to do so, you'll get a Wristwatch Revival sticker in the mail, as well as a thank you card from me for whatever level you choose to do. It really means a lot to each and every one of you who supports me. And I just wanted to say thank you. Okay, the other thing we need to clean up is the case and the related case items. And I'm going to use some distilled water here in my ultrasonic cleaner. And this is my preferred method for cleaning these things. I also use a specific cleaner for ultrasonic cleaners in here. And then I can just put the case and all of the case parts in. And what will happen is I'll run it through a cycle. The water gets warmed up, and then the ultrasonic waves are going through it as well. And with that, it will safely clean up everything. And take a look at the parts here out of the watch cleaning machine, looking all nice, cleaned up, and ready for reassembly. Now let's take a look at this mainspring situation here, and I want to show you kind of how it works. I thought Maximilian might like this as well. So the first thing that you'll notice here is there's a little tiny hook on the outside. Do you see that little extra piece of metal right there? That's a hook meant to grab on to the inner coil of the mainspring itself, which actually has a little slot cut into it for that hook. Do you see that slot on the inside left part? Those two interact and it'll grab onto it so that when you wind the watch, it'll start to turn it from the inside. Now you might be wondering though, well, what holds the mainspring steady? You see that groove in the outer edge of the barrel? If you look at where the mainspring itself actually rubs up against the barrel, it's right here with that little extra tab. That tab will grab onto that groove, and that's what you feel when you get to the end of the wind, where it won't let you wind it anymore. And that's it. In between, it's just a whole bunch of tension. Now, in order to get this mainspring back in, I'm going to use mainspring winders. Now, do you see that little hook right there? That's meant to replicate the same one as on the inner diameter, or I should say outer diameter of the barrel arbor. So it does the same thing. It grabs onto that inner coil and then allows you to wind that mainspring in. And as you can see, I put the mainspring over where that hook is down at the bottom, and that hook will grab onto the inner coil of the mainspring when I turn the handle. So this is basically just replicating what's happening anyway in the mainspring barrel. And this part goes over, and there's a little slot on the side so that when you wind it, everything can stay flat. And then once you start winding, boom, you can see the mainspring just starts going into the tool here. And I have to wind the whole entire thing. Now, when you get to the very end, though, you do have to be a little bit careful because that little tab at the end can get stuck. And so I'll usually just use a pair of tweezers to kind of ease it in. There we go, just like that. And that puts everything inside of the handle there. And now this is actually the trickiest part of the whole thing, is to remove the handle without having the mainspring go flying out, but you get used to it, and you can see the mainspring's nicely nestled, and for all our hard work, we get this. Oh, it's a great feeling when that mainspring just snaps into place, and then it's ready for you to put the arbor back in as well. And again, this has that hook on the outside, so it needs to sit on the inner coils of the mainspring. And I'll use a little bit of medium viscosity oil here too, where that arbor interacts with this lid. And this is the last part of a mainspring barrel. They call it a barrel complete when it has everything: the spring, the arbor, the barrel itself, as well as the lid. And there we go. That little tool just helps me snap the lid into place, and then I can set the mainspring right where it goes in the watch. And as you can see, it spins freely and it's in really good condition as well. Now, I do need to reassemble the seconds pinion here. This type of watch has a center seconds hand, meaning that there's a seconds hand in the middle of the front of the dial, right? So old watches had them off to either the side or down at the bottom as their own separate hand. But this is one of the ways that they figured, oh, look, we can actually put seconds hand on the same axis that the hour and minutes hand is on. And this is one of the ways that they do it. So this is a little tiny tension spring that just holds that pinion in place. We'll install that later, but I just wanted to get it put back together. For now, we can do the train wheels, and these are the wheels that take the energy from the mainspring barrel and put it down to the escapement, which actually regulates the watch on how fast or slow that it actually runs. As you can see, each of these wheels represents a huge gearing ratio difference. And if you were to look at how slowly the actual mainspring barrel unwinds, it's very, very slow. And then the center wheel, which I just put in, and then there's the third and the fourth, and then the escape. And when you gear it down like this over and over and over, the end result is that the last wheel on the train spins very, very quickly. And you turn that very slow moving motion of the mainspring barrel, and by the time it gets to the escape wheel, it spins so fast you can't see it anymore, with your naked eye. Okay, now we can put the barrel bridge on. This one happens to have a jeweled center bearing for the center wheel, and then it has the normal non-jeweled for the mainspring barrel itself. Some watches do have a jewel there as well. It does move so slowly, though, that many of them don't. Now we can put the train wheel bridge on, and this one will have, as you can see, jeweled bearings for the third, fourth, and escape wheels. And there, I already got it into place. And by the way, that's a sign of a really well-made watch too, when that train wheel bridge kind of just falls into place and you don't have to wrestle with it for half an hour. That's a very good sign. So another quick test. And if you look in the lower left, you can't even see the escape wheel until it stops. Now we can put the click and the click spring into place. The click is a very simple device. In fact, there's numerous ways that watch companies accomplish this goal. The way that you see here is the most common among the Swiss brands, especially of anything in this era or even up through the 70s. This was the very typical way to do it. It's a little bit tricky, as you can see, but this is called the click spring, and it just provides a small amount of tension on this item here, which is the click itself. And then all that does is bump up against the ratchet wheel, which is attached to the arbor, which attaches itself to the mainspring barrel. I know that got a little bit complicated, but it's the thing that spins underneath. And all that does is say, you may spin one way and you may not spin another way. A typical ratcheting type of situation. Think about maybe like the bicycle you had when you were a kid. If you had one of those bikes where you could spin the wheels, the pedals one way, but not the other. I'm going to use a little bit of medium viscosity oil for in between here as well. And what I do is I just kind of wedge the oiler in between and then just wait. And the capillary action will actually pull that oil directly into that surface. And I'll give it just a quick spin to make sure that it gets spread around properly. I'm using a little bit of medium viscosity oil on the bridge itself here. You can see there's a little bit of wear where the rhodium plating has actually worn away and it's revealing a little bit of the brass. And that's because every time you wind your watch by hand, which this is a hand-wound watch, so you have to do it every time, that crown wheel is what it's called. It does spin, and it is up against the bridge there. Okay, 2 tiny screws here to hold on that centerpiece. And that'll allow that crown wheel to rotate around it. There's, again, a number of ways that you can hold that crown wheel in place. Many brands choose to do this, which is to use 2 offset smaller screws. Some brands choose to use 1 screw in the center, but if you do that, they will almost always make it a reverse threaded screw so that the screw doesn't get backed out by the natural winding motion of the watch, because that goes the same direction that would unwind the screw if it were a normal one. Okay, so this is now the ratchet wheel, and as you can see, it has a square center hole, and that lines up with the top of the barrel arbor, which is sitting in the barrel underneath. It sort of attaches them together like a sandwich so that you get this ratchet wheel on the top and then the actual barrel underneath. And as you can see, when I wind it, it'll actually start unwinding as well. Now, we can flip the watch over and take a look at the keyless works here. And this hasn't changed in a long time. Again, this watch is from the late 40s, and everything looks basically identical to how watches have been made since. This has really become the typical way to do it, and it uses what's called a clutch wheel and a sliding clutch to accomplish 2 goals. The number 1 goal is so that you can wind up your watch, but the other goal is so that you can set the hands on your watch, but using the same input. In this case, it's the crown and stem. And I'll use a little bit of this blue grease on each of the components of the stem. The blue grease tends to stick a little bit better, and it's for heavier components like this. And the reason to put the crown and stem in right now is that I'd like to put this part in. And this is the setting lever, and it actually engages with a slot on the stem and lets you kind of lock it down so that you can actually start to use it and test it out while you're reassembling. As I go through, I'm going to go ahead and just put on the cannon pinion now. This is friction fit, so just a good firm push over that center wheel will get it into place. And then a little bit of medium viscosity oil on the posts where these next two wheels will sit, just to make sure that they can spin smoothly and not have any issues down the line. That's just an intermediate wheel, and this is the minute wheel here. These are just geared so that they turn at the appropriate number of times, which is, you know, a minute wheel wants to turn full rotation once per minute. A little bit of medium oil once again on these posts. And then this is just the other side of the barrel. And I'm going to use the same technique that I used before, where I just let the oil kind of seep in. Now I got a little bit too much, so I'll use some Radico to clean that up. You just don't want oil just sitting around on a movement. Again, same viscosity oil for inside of the sliding clutch, because that's actually where this part right here, which is called the yoke, it interacts with it. And again, you know, whenever you have metal on metal, you want to have a little bit of lubrication there, just to make sure that there's no shavings or that things don't deteriorate over time. Now, this is the Born to Fly spring. This is the one that's jumped away on me the most. As you can see, it's a tight fit and it's a pretty beefy spring, because you really do need to have serious pressure on that yoke. But I got a pretty decent technique for getting it in there now. You know, pinning it down with a stick or a piece of pegwood and then using your tweezers to kind of drag it into place has really worked well for me. And here I'm going to use some grease for where that spring meets up with the yoke, and then on the other side where the yoke meets up with the setting lever, and just make sure that this is, you know, properly lubricated. And then again, same issue. I have a little bit too much sitting on there, so I'm just going to use the Radico to clean up any excess. Okay, now we can put the setting lever spring on. And this is a two-step process. Basically, you set it into place, you put the screw in, and you screw it down. But you don't have to screw it down all the way, because you do have to make sure that the spring part is actually properly engaged. And you just do that like this. See, and now it's stuck over and engaged. And now I can finish screwing down this part and make sure that it's actually secure. A quick test just to make sure that it's working. And once again, I can use the grease to make sure that any of the parts that are actually metal on metal get proper lubrication. And again, if there's any extra Radico, which is kind of like silly putty, but for grown-up-ish people, it'll clean it up for you. Now, I did not put the pallet fork here into the watch cleaning machine. You can usually do so, but the pallet fork jewels are actually held in place by an organic material called shellac that you heat up, and then it dries very, very hard and very, very dense. Technically, the chemicals in the watch cleaning machine could soften it. So I leave it out and I clean it in a solution called One Dip, where you just put it in, give it a good slosh, and then dry it off. And so you reduce that risk of softening the shellac to basically zero. I have put pallet forks into the watch cleaning machine and not had issues as well. So it's not a huge deal either way, I don't think, but it's just, you know, better be on the safe side. Okay, now we've got the pallet fork in place, and that means that, oh, and by the way, this is a similar process too, where you make sure it's set and then you finish screwing them down. But now we can put in the balance, and we'll see if this watch wants to run for us. Remember, it was running very, very fast. Oh, it's close. It does definitely want to run, and it is running, but it looks like it's kind of barely going. Yeah, just a little bit of a stopper there. Now, it's important to remember, I haven't even finished, you know, installing the bridge yet. And there, it looks like it actually kicked up after I got it screwed down all the way. It does look like it's running a little bit slow still. Low amplitude, not a lot of power there. But we haven't actually oiled the watch yet. So let's do that part now, and I'll show you how to do it. For some of the jewels, particularly this one, we use the medium viscosity oil. This is the center jewel. So this is one of the bigger, heavier wheels in the watch. The rest of them, we're going to use Mobius 9010, which is the thin viscosity oil. And you want to use a very, very, very small amount of it, where it just coats the inner part of that pivot. If you use too much, it's interesting. What will happen is it'll actually flow down that pivot, and it'll go down into the watch. Now, there's not enough there to like screw stuff up, but what it means is that that oil is no longer suspended in that pivot and doing its job because it all drained out to go down to the bottom part. So you do actually want to use a very, very, very small amount if possible. Now, this is actually really cool. So this watch, even though it's from the late 40s, has what they call an INCA shock protection system on it, which is what you see here. It's a brass spring that means that if the watch were to get dropped, it won't necessarily snap that pivot. Where watches from this era and before, it was very, very common for the balance staff to break. It basically, if you dropped your watch hard, you could pretty much guarantee that you have a good chance of having a broken balance staff. But as a feature, it came out. Now it's ubiquitous. Nobody makes watches without shock protection. But at this time, this was pretty new. INCA was some tech. Again, I'm really impressed by this watch. Like, this movement in this watch was a high-end movement for its day. It really, somebody, you know, that wanted a really nice watch that could last them a very long time is the one who bought this. As you can see, this jewel is now flat and reflective and no longer has any dried on oil on it. And that means that I can replace the oil again with the Mobius 9010, that thin viscosity oil. And as you can see, I just put a tiny droplet right in the center, and then I can put the jewel setting on it, and it'll actually stick together because of the capillary action from that oil. But yeah, I'm impressed by this watch. You know, most watches from this era don't have shock protection system at all. And they even put it on the dial of the watch that it has INCA and on the case back as well. Like, this was a feature that people wanted, and that they understood that this would increase the longevity of their watch by quite a bit. And it really does, by the way. Okay, now I can just replace that INCA setting. And after I finish oiling everything else, let's see how the watch is doing. Hey, that's pretty darn good. Much better time, much better amplitude, but there's a pretty significant beat error there. 3.8 milliseconds, you know, that's a little bit high, and I would prefer to remedy that rather than leave it. My tolerance for a watch of this age is I want it under 1 millisecond. Perfect is 0 milliseconds. That's what you really, really want. That can be very difficult to achieve on a watch like this, but you know, at least to get it under 1, it'll run fine. It won't affect the timekeeping. Everything will be good. But 3.8, 3.9, like that's actually pretty far out. So what I can do here is, yeah, we have to go backwards a little bit. And I'm going to actually just let down the mainspring and take apart the balance and take out the pallet fork and stuff. And then I can put the balance back into place. And this will allow us to get at least an idea of what direction we need to go. So if you take a look at the two metal posts at the bottom and then the jewel that sits in between, you can get an idea for which way it's facing. In this case, it's facing off to the right a little bit, which means that I need to move the whole balance assembly over to the left by 2 degrees. I don't know, 3 something, you know, some fraction of a tiny amount. And the way that I do this is I disassemble the entire balance, and then the hairspring is actually held on by a metal collet. And if I take a tiny, tiny screwdriver, I can actually turn it. You see how much I turned it? That was it. Like that tiny little amount over to the side in an attempt to get that jewel to rest between like that. So if I give it a quick flick and see where its natural resting state is, I want it between those two posts about as close as I can get. And that looks pretty good, actually. That was a decent shot at a first adjustment. So let's take a look and see how it does now. Hey, that's much better. 0.8 milliseconds, in fact, 0.7, and it's still running at +1 seconds a day and 234 degrees of amplitude. So I am thrilled with that, and we're going to call this a runner. Now take a look at the crystal. It's got some pretty deep scratches on it, but I wanted to keep the crystal original to it because it's actually in good shape overall. So I'm going to refurbish this crystal instead of installing a new one this time. So I've got these sanding sticks that I like to use. I like to use these for multiple different purposes. You know, it gives you a kind of a hard back to use on it, and it comes with 8 of them. So there's like this nice progression. And I'm going to start off with the coarsest one that I'll use here. And the idea here is to knock down those scratches. This crystal is made of acrylic. It's a fairly soft material. And so, you know, it works pretty well. when it comes to getting refurbished. It is a amenable material for that. It is a process, however. So I'm going to have to go through probably 4 or 5, maybe 6 of these sticks, one at a time. And then we're going to finish with liquid polish as well. As you can see, the crystal gets very smoky and cloudy when you're still in the early processes of this. But as long as you get those major scratches down with the first sanding stick, then you can wet sand all the way through the rest of them one at a time until you get to what looks like a pretty darn smooth surface by the time it gets to the second to last step. And the last step, like I said, is actually using like a liquid polish that's made specifically for crystals like this. So as I clean up a little bit here, take a look. Pretty good, right? You can see the fundamentals are good. No deep scratches or anything like that, but it's not crystal clear. And that's what this poly watch does. This is a great little product. If you have any watches with acrylic crystals on it, this can really do wonders to help bring them back to life. You just use a little bit of the poly watch and then a cloth like this, and you just go to town. I mean, you do this for 5 minutes, give it good pressure, and you can repeat the process once if you want as well. I like to repeat it because once again, we're doing like a full crystal refurbish on this thing, but it works wonders on these crystals. So quick cleanup, and let's take a look at how it came out, and look at that. I mean, what an incredible improvement, right? So much better. And I'm telling you, these crystals, if you just take your time, they really come back to life. Okay, now we got to deal with the hands. Now, I had a chat with Maximilian about what he wanted to do, and he decided he did want to relume the hands. He didn't want to leave them empty like this. And I've got a lume kit that I got that kind of imitates old lume. Lume turns into a light creamy color, then like a darker color, and then kind of like a pumpkin color, and then it turns kind of brown and black as it ages. The good lume. Radium lume turns into this kind of dark, nasty color. And so I'm going to pick something in the middle. This has a slightly orangish hue to it, but it's on the little bit darker side. You can get a feel for the pigment color right there. It looks a little different when it's actually dried and everything, but something like that. And what I do is I take the glow-in-the-dark pigment and then I mix it with a binder here. And a binder is just a liquid that allows me to dissolve that pigment in it, spread it onto the hands, and then it will dry up and leave behind a structure for that pigment to kind of live in. And so I just put some of the binder in my little mixing cup along with the pigment and then get to mixing. And that's it. I mean, it's not that hard to do, but the key here is you want to get the right consistency. And this is too thin. So what do? I add a little bit more pigment to it. And you just go back and forth until you get the right feel for how the pigment should be and how the total mixture should be. You don't want it too thin. It'll run through and kind of get everywhere. And you don't want it too thick because then you can't use capillary action to help keep it between the spaces in the hands. And it'll do it by itself if you get it right and you're careful about it. Okay, so there's our pigment. Now I can take the hands. As you can see, I've used 2 little sticks of Rodico to make some bridges for it. And watch. Just a little tiny bit on an oiler. And if I pull it across, it just goes right into the grooves of the hand automatically. And I can do that same thing here. And you can see how you need it to be liquid so that it can actually fill in those gaps on its own, how liquid does. If it's a little too thick, it won't do that. And again, if it's too thin, you won't have enough material there for it to be properly glow in the dark. Okay, so while that's drying, we can replace the crystal. And as I mentioned, this is a little different than normal because it's a tension ringed crystal. So this needs to be pressed into place. And I just mean press fit, like squished in there. And so I'll use a base on the bottom of my Rober press here that just fits the case itself. And then I can put the crystal, nicely refurbished, thank you very much, I can just seat it gently into place, and I'll just use a little protective film here just so there's no scratches. And then I can use my Rober press to pretty gently actually pop the crystal back into place. You'll hear it and feel it when it goes in. There, just like that. And it'll seat itself, and again, that metal tension ring will push out against the crystal and make sure that it's as waterproof as it can be. So that looks beautiful. In fact, it looks like a brand new crystal. I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. And one last thing before we do the final assembly, we need to change the gasket that's in the crown here. And there's a little cover that needs to come off. But as you can see, the gasket, it's actually full of dirt and grime. And then there's also a rubber gasket inside. And I'm just going to use this pick. Oh, yikes. To take the gasket, the old gasket out. You can see it's pretty well worn and ready to be replaced. And there's a bunch of gunk that's still inside. So what I'll do is I'll get it a little bit loose and then I'll put this crown into the ultrasonic cleaner. And this is what it comes out looking like after. Much, much better. And in order to help make it as waterproof as I can for Maximilian, I'm going to use some silicone grease here to help kind of keep everything together. And then I can replace it with a new gasket. And after that, we can put on the little cap that keeps everything together. And then we can get ready for the final assembly. And we can do the final assembly on the movement. I mentioned this part before. This is the center seconds that I had put back together, but I haven't reinstalled it in the watch yet. So a little bit of oil there. And as you can see, it goes right through the center wheel. There's actually a hole through the center wheel that pinion can go through. The question is, though, how does that pinion turn? The pinion is what the seconds hand, the one that tells you how many seconds have gone by, is actually attached to. So how does it turn? And this is how it turns. This wheel attaches to the top of the fourth wheel pivot, and then it turns, the seconds hand. So what that means is I just need to make sure that it's properly aligned with the pivot. And then I'm actually going to use my hand press to put this into place. You can use a staking set. You can use a bunch of different tools, but this is not a complicated process. You just need to give it a good firm press and it will go into place like that. That's the beginning and end of it right there. Now we can finish assembling the watch itself. I need to put the dial on. I need to put the hands on. I need to case up the watch. And then we need to pick out a new strap for Maximilian as well. And there's that dial again. Got to be careful with it. Those lume plots, the dark lume around the outside are radioactive. So, you want to wear a mask for something like this. You want to make sure that you're in a well-ventilated space. And if you don't know what you're doing with it, I would not work on these for what it's worth. Okay, this is a silicone grease applicator here. So we're going to replace the gasket for the case back since we're almost ready to put this watch fully back together. And a little bit of silicone grease makes it a little bit more pliable. It makes it last a little bit longer and it makes it a little bit more waterproof as well. So there we go. Now, this is an interesting thing that I've never actually dealt with before. Maximilian made a special request. So oftentimes watchmakers will carve numbers or something into the back of the watch when they work on it. This one actually has a couple watchmakers marks. I don't do that. I've always felt like I didn't feel right about, carving my name or whatever into somebody else's watch. But Max actually asked me to do it. And so I said, okay. And I actually am going to go with my dad's initials. We share the same name group. His name was Lee Marshall Sutcliffe and my name is Marshall Lee Sutcliffe. So we're kind of named after each other. And I didn't do a great job with it, but Max asked, and so I went for it. Let's take a look at how the hands came out. Ooh, that looks nice. Yeah, I like that color. See, if you use brand new lume, it's very, very bright white and it really stands out against an aged dial like that. And I don't like that. This I do like though. I think that's a really nice color, for an older watch like this, down to the 40s, from the 1940s. So now we can put the watch hands back on. I also think it'll go well with how this dial looks overall. As you can see, it's got that age. Oh yeah, that's cool. I could have matched it. I actually gave Maximilian the choice to match it up to the lume plots on the outside. I wouldn't recommend it because radium lume plots look dirty and kind of worn out. But everybody has their own opinion. So I asked him, and he agreed with me though. He said, no, I don't want it to look like that. I hope that he's happy with how the lume came out here, as that was his decision. I am. This is what I would have done too. So I think Maximilian has good taste. Okay, and there's the seconds hand that I was talking about before. And I can just, again, gently put that into place. Now, what I like to do is use a microfiber cloth to just clean up the interior of the crystal, and then an air blower just to make sure that there's no fibers or anything on the dial or on the inside of the crystal before I go ahead and recase the watch. And here, you know, you can kind of get it placed and then turn everything over before you get everything kind of lined up. Because you do need to make sure that everything's lined up so that this part can go in here, and there, went in just fine, no problem. And I can make sure that that's good. And then as you can see, there's a movement ring here as well. This is very typical. This takes up the space between the movement and the case and make sure that nothing can move around inside. And then we can put the case back on. I can't wait to see how this watch came out. I mean, the fact that it still runs so well after all this time and it needed just a good service is really impressive. And as I said, whoever bought this watch, they got a nice one. Waterproof, Inca block, all of it. And yeah, the crown's like a little stiff, but that's sometimes normal. And it looks like the hands are setting just fine. And take a look at this thing. What a beautiful watch. And I can't believe it. Maximilian found this thing at a flea market for $3.50 from his grandpa. What a great purchase from grandpa to grandson there. We're going to throw a new strap on this watch as well. Hopefully it'll help accentuate the dial and the patinaed nature of it. Let's see how this thing came out overall. Oh, that is awesome. I love this watch. This to me is exactly the reason to do this hobby, is you find something like this at the flea market for a few bucks and you can turn it into a watch you could wear for the rest of your life and maybe even have some good memories of a family member as well. Now, before I sign off, I did want to show you the glow in the dark section, the lume, and see how it does. You can see the hands in the middle with the new lume are really glowing, where the ones on the outside that are radium are mostly dead, and they won't glow at all under normal conditions either. That's going to do it for this video. I just wanted to say thank you so much for hanging out with me and going on this journey. I really appreciate that you take the time. If you want to find me on Instagram, I am wristwatch_revival. I hope to see you over there, and I hope to see you on the next video. We'll see you then.